Everyone gets the story wrong. Ask anyone who knows their Tolkien lore, and they'll tell you Durin the Deathless was the greatest dwarf who ever lived, born at the dawn of the world, founded the mightiest kingdom ever carved from stone, lived so long that even the elves, the immortals, looked at him sideways. And then, eventually, he died, like everything dies. End of story. Except it wasn't the end. And here's the thing nobody talks about. When you actually follow what Tolkien was saying about why Durin kept coming back, when you trace the full shape of what his existence actually meant, the story curdles. It stops being heroic. It stops being mythic in the way we like our myths, triumphant, clean, earned. It becomes something that should genuinely disturb you. Because Durin the Deathless wasn't blessed. He was trapped. And the cage wasn't built by an enemy. It was built by everything he loved.
Let me ask you something most people never think to ask. What does it actually feel like to be sent back? Not reincarnated, that word doesn't quite cover it. Reincarnation in most traditions comes with the mercy of forgetting. You dissolve, you reform, you begin again without the weight of before pressing down on you. Clean slate, fresh start. Whatever you were, you are no longer burdened by it. That is not what happened to Durin. Durin's soul, his Fea in Tolkien's language, was taken and returned, placed back into the world wearing his own face, drawn to his own mountain, destined to look into his own lake and see himself staring back from another age entirely. 6 times this happened, 6 confirmed returns across thousands of years of Middle-earth history. Same soul, same name, same impossible inheritance. And Tolkien wasn't writing this casually. This wasn't flavor text. Every piece of his mythology operates on a moral logic. Souls matter, choices matter. The weight of existence is real in his world in a way it rarely is in fantasy. So here is the question that should be sitting at the back of your skull right now. If Tolkien's world is built on the sacredness of the soul, on free will, on fate, on the deep cosmic rightness of things finding their proper rest, then what does it mean that Durin never got to rest? What does it mean that this particular soul kept being handed back over and over into a world that was always already older than when he left it? Is that mercy? Is that honor? Or is that something else entirely?
And Ilúvatar caught him. What happened next is one of the most quietly devastating moments in all of Tolkien. Ilúvatar didn't destroy them, didn't erase them. He adopted them, gave them real souls, genuine ones, not the puppet-like existence Owly had accidentally created. He made them truly alive. But Owly's fingerprints never washed off. There is something in the dwarven soul, something in its very architecture that reflects its maker. Owly was the god of craft, of endurance, of things built to last. And so the dwarves are hard. Not in the vulgar sense of tough or stubborn, though they are that too. Hard in a deeper way. Their souls resist domination, resist dissolution, resist being moved. Think of it like this. If an elvish soul is deep water, capable of flowing around anything, shaped by everything it touches, carrying the memory of every shore it's ever known, then a dwarven soul is bedrock. It does not flow. It does not give. It holds. Which sounds like a strength, and it is. Until it isn't. Because bedrock doesn't bend, and a soul that cannot bend cannot be released. To really get under the skin of this, you need to understand something that most casual Tolkien fans breeze right past. Dwarves aren't like anyone else in Middle-earth, and I don't mean culturally, I mean cosmologically. At the level of their actual creation, their actual origin, they are fundamentally different from every other speaking race on the planet. Elves and men were made by Ilúvatar, the supreme being, the creator of everything. Their souls are his directly, woven into the great music before the world even existed, each one an intentional, unrepeatable note in an infinite composition. There is something sacred about that, something that gives elvish and human souls a kind of latitude, freedom. The elves can sail west and find rest in the undying lands. Men pass beyond the world entirely, to a fate so beautiful and so unknown that even the Valar don't have clearance to look at it. Both of them have somewhere to go. Now, the dwarves. Aule made them, one of the great Valar, the angelic powers who shaped the physical world. Aule was a craftsman of impossible skill, and he had a problem. He loved the idea of the children of Iluvatar so desperately, was so consumed by the vision of beings who would make things and love making things, that he simply couldn't wait. He went off alone and built them himself. 7 fathers, hammered and sculpted and breathed life into them with his own will. Here's where the story changes shape on you. In the Peoples of Middle-earth, one of Tolkien's posthumously published collections, the kind of deep-cut material that most people never reach, there are notes about the dwarves and their beliefs around death and return. And what Tolkien describes is not vague. The dwarves believed, genuinely, deeply believed, that the soul of their greatest king would be sent back to them, not as a spiritual presence, not as memory or legacy or some comforting metaphor. Back, in a body, breathing, walking, digging. And there was a test. Every time a new Durin appeared, he would make his way to Keled Zaram, the Mirrormere, a high mountain lake of extraordinary stillness, not far from the gates of Khazad Dûm. He would walk to its edge, alone, and he would look down into the water, and he would see his own reflection. But around his head, around his face in the black mirror of the lake, there would be a crown of stars, stars that had no business being there. Stars that didn't match the sky overhead. Stars from another time, another configuration, an older arrangement of the heavens that had long since drifted from that pattern. He was seeing the Mirrormere as it looked the very first time Durin stood at its edge, in the earliest age, before kingdoms, before grief, before anything was lost. The dwarves saw this as sacred confirmation, divine appointment. He is the one. He has returned to us. But I want you to actually sit with what that image means. A man stands at the edge of a lake and looks at his own reflection, and his reflection is wearing a crown of stars from a sky that no longer exists. He's not just seeing himself, he's seeing a ghost, an echo of a version of himself that lived and died thousands of years before he was born, and that ghost is looking back. That's not a coronation. That's a haunting. And here's what shifts everything. Tolkien's mythology is saturated with the idea that attachment to the past is a form of spiritual decay. The elves who can't let go, who refuse to sail west, who stay bound to Middle-earth long after their time, they don't stay vital. They fade. They become thin and gray, shadows of what they were, still present, but no longer fully alive. Tolkien saw the inability to accept endings as one of the deepest wounds a soul could carry. So what does that make of Durin? What does it make of a soul that didn't just struggle to let go, but was not permitted to?
Picture the first awakening. Durin, the original, the first, opens his eyes at the beginning of the world. No history yet, no weight of generations pressing down, just stone and silence and the distant light of a sun still learning its own routine. He walks to the lake. He sees the stars. He names himself. He names his mountain. He reaches into the dark and pulls out something extraordinary. A kingdom, a civilization, the gold-threaded, impossible masterwork of Khazad Dûm, carved over centuries into the bones of the earth. By any measure, a life of staggering achievement. And then he dies. And then he comes back. But here's what nobody pauses on. The soul that wakes up the second time is waking up into a world where the greatest thing it will ever do has already been done. The founding is over. The first stone has been struck, the first hall carved, the first vein of mithril discovered. Everything that follows is, in some sense, inheritance, maintenance, stewardship of a glory that belongs to a self he can't fully remember being. Every subsequent Durin is born already behind, already measured against an original he can only partially glimpse, in old songs, in the eyes of his people, in a reflection at the bottom of a mountain lake that shows him a crown of stars he didn't earn in this life. Think about that kind of pressure. Not the external pressure of expectation. That's hard enough. But the internal pressure of a soul that knows, on some level it can't quite articulate, that it has done this before. That there is a version of itself that was larger, truer, more complete, and that its entire present existence is an attempt to recover something it can't quite name.
Then layer on top of that what happens in the Second Age. Durin III, one of the later iterations, carrying the full freight of all that history, receives a ring of power from Celebrimbor, one of the 7 given to the Dwarf Lords. And Sauron, who was behind every gift of that kind, understood exactly what he was doing. He couldn't break dwarves the way he broke men. The stone soul held against that kind of direct assault. Men could be dominated, hollowed out, turned into something barely recognizable as the thing they started as. But dwarves just got angry. The ring couldn't find purchase on a will that hard. So instead, it did something quieter, something almost elegant in its cruelty. It amplified. Whatever was already there, the love of craft, the hunger for beauty, the desperate need to go deeper and find more and build something that would finally be worthy of the name Durin. The ring took all of that and turned up the volume. Didn't change the signal, just made it louder, more insistent, more impossible to ignore. And so the drive to dig went from passion to compulsion. The search for treasure went from pride to obsession. And Khazad Dûm, that magnificent cathedral of stone and light and dwarven ingenuity, began its long, slow transformation into something else, into Moria. The dwarves kept digging, kept going deeper, and somewhere in the dark beneath them, patient as geology, something was waiting.
All right, here it is, the thing the story has been building toward this whole time. Durin the Deathless is not a story about immortality. It's not even a story about legacy, not really. Strip it down to its core, and what you have is a story about a soul that was never allowed to finish. Every loop, every return, every new life, Durin woke up mid-sentence, in the middle of a story already in progress, inheriting wreckage and glory in equal measure, with no clear memory of how either came to be. Each iteration drove his people a little further into the deep, searching for the thing that would complete the purpose, the vindication, the moment where all the sacrifice and all the returning finally added up to something that felt whole. That moment never came. Durin the sixth return, the last confirmed great Durin before the prophesied 7th, was killed in Khazad Dûm. Not in battle against some foreign enemy, not defending his people from an invasion. He was killed by something his own people dug up. A Balrog, a Maya of fire, one of the ancient spirits that served Morgoth in the First Age, who had been sleeping in the deepest dark under the mountain for thousands of years. The dwarves, amplified by greed that the ring had only worsened, had dug straight into it. And the dwarves, in their grief and horror, gave that creature a name. Durin's Bane. Sit with that for a second. Not the Balrog of Moria, not the Flame of Udun, which is what Gandalf called it on the bridge. The dwarves named it for what it destroyed. They named it for Durin. As if, on some wordless cultural level, they understood that this thing wasn't just a monster they'd accidentally excavated. It was specifically, cosmically, the end of Durin. The full stop at the end of a sentence that had been running for thousands of years. What if it was? What if the Balrog wasn't sleeping randomly under Khazad Dûm? What if in the deeply purposeful moral universe Tolkien constructed, where nothing great happens without meaning, that ancient creature of ruin had been drawn there, or placed there, or simply was there, as the answer to the question of what breaks a soul that cannot be broken? You can't shatter bedrock with pressure. You have to find the fault line. And Durin's fault line was always the same. The drive to go deeper, to find more, to believe the great thing was always one more level down. The Balrog didn't kill Durin the Sixth because it was strong. It killed him because everything Durin ever was led directly to that moment in that tunnel at that depth. The loop didn't break. It was terminated.
And now I have to step back, because this is where it stops being about dwarves. Tolkien was a man who lost his closest friends in the trenches of the Somme, who spent decades building a mythology in what spare hours he could carve out of an academic life. who understood with the bone-deep clarity of someone who had watched beautiful things be destroyed and had chosen to keep creating anyway, that the act of making something, truly committing yourself to building something that will outlast you, is one of the most human and one of the most dangerous things you can do. Because when you build something, you bind yourself to it, and when it falls, some part of you falls with it. And the question that haunts every builder, every founder, every person who has ever poured themselves into a thing they loved is whether you can survive the falling, whether you can look at the ruins without being ruined yourself. Durin couldn't. Or rather, Durin was never given the chance to find out. He was always sent back before he could grieve, always returned before the loss could settle, always placed back at the beginning of the same story, with the same purpose, and told not in words, but in the weight of his own soul, to go again, try again, go deeper, find the thing that makes it all make sense.
There is no treasure at the bottom of Khazad. There never was. The mithril was real, the craftsmanship was real, the beauty of those deep halls, lit by the memory of stars none of the dwarfs had ever seen, was absolutely real. But the point, the thing Durin was actually searching for across 6 lifetimes, wasn't a vein of silver. It was resolution, the feeling of a story arriving finally at its proper end. And Tolkien, who believed in proper ends more deeply than almost any writer of the 20th century, kept it just out of reach. Maybe because that's honest. Maybe because the most human thing about Durin, the thing that makes him not just a myth but a mirror, is that the resolution never comes the way we expect it to. It never comes because we went one level deeper. It comes, if it comes at all, when we finally let ourselves stop digging.
The Mirrormere is still there. In whatever space Middle-earth occupies in the geography of imagination, Keled Zerum is still cold and still and perfectly, terribly dark. And if you crouched at its edge, the way Durin crouched 6 times across the long centuries, and looked into it, you'd see your own face looking back. And around your face, stars that don't belong to tonight. Stars from the very first morning, before the mountain had a name, before the first hammer struck the first stone, before the first dwarf looked into this same water and felt the weight of a soul older than his body settle into his chest like a foundation being laid. That's what the reflection shows. Not greatness, not destiny, not divine confirmation of anything. It shows you a self that existed before the loss, before the long accumulation of everything that went wrong, everything that fell, everything that was built and broken and built again. A self that was about to begin, full of the specific and irreplaceable hope that belongs only to beginnings.
And you can't go back to that. Nobody can, not even Durin. All he could do was look at it, every single time, and then turn away from the lake and walk toward the mountain and do it all again. Somewhere, in Tolkien's imagined Fourth Age, a 7th Durin is said to come, one final return. The one who will reopen the doors, walk back into the dark, and reclaim what was lost. And I keep thinking, does he know? Not the lore of it, not the prophecy, but does he know, in whatever dreaming space exists between one life and the next, what he's walking back into? The weight of it, the ancient, stone-heavy love of a place that has swallowed 5 versions of him whole. The stars in the water, the hammer, the dark. Does he choose it anyway? And is that the most heroic thing in all of Middle-earth, or the most heartbreaking? I genuinely don't know. I'm not sure Tolkien did either. Maybe that's the point. But here's the thing that keeps me up at night about Khazad Dûm. The Balrog wasn't the worst thing under that mountain. It wasn't even the oldest. Because long before Durin's Bane was ever disturbed, long before the dwarves dug anywhere close to where it slept, there are hints in Tolkien's notes of something else. Something the dwarves encountered in the earliest years of Khazad Dûm and never spoke of openly again. A presence, a wrong kind of silence in certain deep corridors that even the bravest miners refused to enter twice. The dwarves had a name for it, or they did, briefly, Then they stopped saying the name at all. What was it? Why did they keep digging toward it even after they knew it was there? And what does it tell us about what Khazad Dûm actually was, beneath all the mithril and the grandeur and the legend? That story begins in the Second Age, and it doesn't end anywhere comfortable.